Councilor Gordon Perry is running late. Was not an easy task getting out of the city this evening, I guess. So anyway, we will call the meeting to order. Councilor Tingley is vice chair, but since our deputy warden is on his way, we've agreed that I'll just start it until Mike gets here. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging that we are in Mi'kma'ki in the district of Sipekne'katik, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. We're going to continue the tax analysis and the business plans. So without further ado, I will turn it over to the CAO.
Thank you, Madam Warden. So this evening's budget meeting, I intend to finish off the business plans. I have two departments left to go through, Parks, Rec and Culture and Planning and Development. So we'll review what's on the horizon for those two departments. Jordan is going to be presenting the capital budget for you this evening. And the reason we do the capital budget prior to finalizing the operating budget is, of course, because the debt charges for some of those projects are included in the capital budget. So if your capital changes, so will your operating budget. The HR report was posted to the agenda for your review. I don't plan on doing a detailed presentation of it this evening, but if you have any questions or concerns, we can certainly bring that up and go through it. And then Sue will be looking at the transfer tax revenue and the commercial tax rate slides that we've prepared. They have prepared for this evening per council's request at the last meeting. And that also includes some review of the adjustments you've done, we've recommended in the budget so far, and then any further adjustments that you want to make. We will finish the night with questions, and of course you can ask questions as we go through, and the subsequent budget meeting will be February 2nd, which is this Thursday evening, and pleased to bring back any information that we can get for you between now and Thursday, understanding that time is a little tight, so hopefully we'll be able to do that. So without further ado, I will continue on with the Parks, Recreation, and Culture budget. So in Parks, Recreation, and Culture, we do have 4 key areas. In recreation, that covers all of your
Did I hear you right? Did you say you're not going through the HR report?
Through you, Madam Warden, we don't typically present the HR report during the budget discussion, but we can certainly answer questions on it.
Well, I would think that, I would appreciate it because I think there's a lot of stuff in there that we have to digest. And it just seems like, I don't know, maybe it's just me, but we're just brushing over this stuff. Oh, we don't got to get through this. We don't get to get through that. Like, if we're serious about trying to trim this budget a little bit further, like, I think everything should be on the table. I'm not happy with just brushing stuff off. Thank you.
Through you, Madam Warden, I have no issues presenting the HR report. We've been doing that report for 10 years. I don't think we've ever presented it at budget. So I'm not trying to brush it off. It's just something we've never done. So if council wants a full presentation of that report, we can absolutely do that. I guess I'll leave that to the rest of committee to decide.
What is your wish? We've had this report in front of us for review. Councillor Rhino wishes to have the report presented. I'd just like to get a read if everyone feels that way or if others are comfortable just asking any questions they might have after having gone through the report. Councillor Tingley.
I'm comfortable just asking questions.
Thank you.
I would take questions.
Thank you. How about just a straw poll, a show of hands for those who are comfortable asking questions? Show of hands for those who would like to go through the entire report. So majority says we are comfortable going with questions. And I'm sure the opportunity is always there for any other counselor to, at any time, bring questions forward or ask them. Okay, back to you, CAO.
Thank you, Madam Warden. So the Parks, Recreation, and Culture budget, net impact on your general tax rate this year is $275,000. A lot of that is variances within your recreation department and in your buildings function. So the recreation, we have at the Aquatic Center, we have program revenue and facility rental revenue that is up at that facility. I would say what we're experiencing right now is a significant increase in the usage of that facility. And we've made some operating changes that will allow us in the next budget to have more folks come into our open swims. That would be the majority of that program revenue would be open swims and added lesson opportunities for folks. We have a waiting list every time we put lessons out. And lately, we've been having waiting lists as well for people wanting to get into the facility for open swim. So adding lifeguards to the rotation allows us to increase the opportunities for people to use that facility. And of course, increase revenues as well as increase expenses on the other side. We do have in the budget an outdoor storage work shed for that facility. As we grow and use the facility, we've sort of realized that storage, maybe we should have put a little bit more storage in the building, but here we are. So we do have $20,000 in the budget to put an outdoor storage work shed to facilitate maintenance around the building. There's also money in the budget for some interior signage for the building to improve the customer experience and more security cameras and a security audit. So similar to what we've just done with this building, we just went through a physical security audit. We'd like to do the same thing over at the facility, and we know that there is some gaps in the security cameras that we'd like to increase over there as well. So the parks section, you've seen, if you've been to the playgrounds around East Hants, some of them have been piloted this year for play boxes. So those are large boxes in the playgrounds that are filled with all kinds of fun things for the kids to do while they're at the playground as well. So that program has been extremely well received. And the intention is to put 2 more play boxes in our municipal playgrounds this coming year and then build on that program as the years progress. And we also have capital projects to do a playground on John Murray Drive. And you have 2 playgrounds being planned for Walton and Maitland tourism areas. With those projects, really exciting for those communities to get 2 municipal playgrounds in there. Once again, on the tourism side, we have the Rising Tide Shore signage program. That is a program that's been in your budget for a year or 2 now. And it is a partnership with at least 2 other municipalities, primarily West Hants. We just haven't had the tourism resources to do that up to this point. So the intention is that Alana and her team will be taking that on this year and hopefully making some headway towards that Rising Tide signage program, which will sort of take the tourists from one end to the other, not just within our municipality, but along that entire shore with a good signage program. And there's also money in this budget to do a webcam installation at Burtcote Head Park. Up to this point, we haven't had the infrastructure for high-speed internet out there that's required for a webcam, but we do now. So we're pretty excited to have that put up as part of the provincial webcam programs. So as far as buildings go, we do have the condition assessment almost done for the Sportsplex. So we'll be taking that report. It is broken down between operating and capital items and preparing a plan based on that. There is money in this budget for capital work that may be required in that building, and that money will be funded from reserves. Any of those projects, there's $225,000 in there to be funded from reserves. We also have a new position proposed in this budget for a building maintenance coordinator. Primarily, the struggle that we're having now is we have our manager of recreation doing building maintenance, and we have a lot of recreation needs in your community. So my intent is to have the manager of recreation still oversee the larger building piece as a manager, but we do need someone who can coordinate the day-to-day work. We have a building maintenance technician who works over at the Aquatic Center primarily, but also does some work here. And there is money in this budget to have a casual building maintenance position who can step in when we need to get some of the other projects done as well. So with an increase in your buildings and the aquatic function, we are very short on building functionality, people to do that. And again, the issue is that your recreation programs are suffering because of it. So I think part of your plan is to increase your direct programming to your communities. And to do that, I need a manager who's focused on recreation and not, meeting contractors and doing fire alarm checks and whatnot. I need him to focus on recreation. So that position is in there to go forward. And I just wanted to bring to your attention, I know council last week had talked about the businesses in East Hants and sort of talking about the commercial tax rate. I thought it would be interesting for you to see the impact in this budget on minimum wage. So minimum wage will increase on April 1st. So for us as an employer, that means an increase of $25,500 just because minimum wage goes up. And then if you look at a potential increase in October 2023, that would be another $6,500 for us as an employer. So we did, because we don't know, there's a couple of things in here. Because we don't know if we're going to have that, we've brought some money in from reserves to offset that minimum wage increase. Of course, businesses don't always have the ability to do that when you're talking about a small business. And we also have some money in here coming in from reserves because for the last few years and even for this year as we transition our programming, we're not quite sure of the impact yet between the revenues and expenditures for staffing at the Aquatic Center. So we've brought in $19,000 just to bridge that gap.
Do you have a question, Kim?
Yeah.
Councillor Musa.
Yeah, I look at building in a business park in Mount Uniacke, and most of them went up like, the least is 6.6% and the rest like up to 10 to 20%. So, and there's no cap there. So I think we should be looking at those people too, at those businesses. Like.
Thank you, Madam Warden. Through you, there is a slide later on this evening that we did some of that looking as well and looked at some of the businesses and what's impacted. So our growth on our commercial rate is kind of split between new business and existing business. So Sue will talk more about that later. So in our planning and development department, this department, the net impact on the general tax rate is $173,000. This department has 14 and a half full-time staff. There is an increase in your building permit and development revenue proposed for $17,000. And I don't remember the last time that came to council, but council decided not to increase your permit fees for that. If you'd like, you can re-look at that, and we can bring a report back if you wanted to consider your fees. But for now, the fee increase is just based on volume, not based on any actual fee increase. We do have in the budget from reserves to be funded a Lance secondary planning strategy. So that would be a planning strategy for I'm not very good with directions, but the north side of the 102 in Lance. So from the river by the Superstore up towards Milford. Looking at that section of land in East Hants and figuring out what the best way forward from a development perspective is for that. We also have the plan update and rural comprehensive planning to be completed this year. All of you know that that's ongoing, so we do have some costs within our budgets in planning and development that we've funded from reserves, because that rural plan update really is very specific to this year. So we'll fund those from reserves as well. Council had a report on the village core parking plan design for Shubenacadie and approved putting some money in the budget to do that design. And of course, that stems back to the folks in Shubenacadie, the way that their land and buildings sit, very difficult for those businesses on the main street of Shubenacadie to meet our parking requirements. So moving forward, we need to look at a solution for that if we want that village to thrive. And using municipal parking as part of that solution, having parking in the middle of the village so that those businesses don't need to rely on intensive parking requirements, council has decided is the solution. So that is to be funded for the design of that from reserves in this year's budget. This year's budget also includes a position for a development control admin assistant. So a little bit on that. The current planning and development and PRC departments share one receptionist / admin assistant. She is absolutely overwhelmed with all of the planning stuff that comes through the door nowadays, and I don't think Parks, Rec, and Culture gets the best of her. So the proposal and what I've been doing the last few months is we've hired some part-time help, full-time casual help for this year to get us through. But really the two departments are seeing significant activity, and the planning department still requires their admin assistant to do administrative tasks, but we also require a development control assistant to provide assistance to the development officer and the administrative assistance to the development function. There's 3 or 4 positions there that need that assistance. We also have, as part of our longer-term plan for building officials, as we all know, building officials are very difficult to find, and we do have some succession needs in the department over the next few years. So we do have a building official that is in this budget that is funded from reserves. And as we go through the next 2 or 3 years, that position, we'll see how the growth has kept up and where our building permits are at the time, and make some decisions then about whether you maintain 3 building inspectors or go back to 2. And in this budget, there is the position that council approved that we fill full-time during 2022, the Assistant Development Officer. So we have funded that this year we have funded that position with $35,000 from reserves. And again, the intent of these positions, because they are driven by the growth that we're having, the intent is that that growth should pay for those positions over the next few years. So we will see that, you know, it's the chicken and the egg. You need the people to get the growth. You need the growth to pay for the people. So funding those from reserves, we think that that's a responsible thing to do at this point in your growth trajectory, and something that next year you can look at to see, again, how that would be funded.
All right, there's a couple questions here. First up, Councilor McPhee.
Oh, thank you. CAO, I was wondering, with the Shubenacadie plan, that's $50,000 just for the design of it for this year, and then with hopefully construction starting in the following year? Yeah.
Is that the plan? That would be John.
Through you, Warden. Yes, the idea this year is that $50,000 is just for design work, to hire an engineering firm to do the work. It would be nice if it happens in the following year, but it really depends, I guess, on what we find with that design work and how much we expect it to cost after that work is done. But it could happen the following year, or it may be pushed out, depending.
And I was wondering, there's a problem with parking on Trunk 2. I know is that going to be, can that be incorporated into the plan? I mean, a lot of people would like to see that parking availability right in front of the bank removed?
Through you, Chair. No, this is specifically to look at the off-site parking issue for those businesses that don't have on-site parking. If there's a traffic control issue on the number 2 itself, that's, I think, beyond the scope of this project.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Councillor Musa.
Same question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So councillors, those are the highlights of your business plans. You have your business plans in your binder. You have all the variance tables there. If there's any questions on those, we can absolutely answer them for you. Jordan's going to start now going through the capital budget, and he'll take you through sort of the changes to that and any new monies that are being looked for. And then we'll get into answering some of those questions you had from last week and talking about possible adjustments to your budgets for tax purposes.
All right, take it away, Jordan.
Right. Go. Okay, so tonight I will be going over the new projects in the capital budget as well as any existing projects that have been adjusted. I won't present every project from the document today, but staff will answer any questions that councillors may have. And you will see updated capital budget sheets for project 16009 and project 20016, where the sources of funding have been adjusted. And I will speak more to this later in the presentation. So this is a 5-year capital budget. This budget serves as the capital investment plan for the Canada Community Building Fund, formerly known as gas tax. And part of the requirement for gas tax funding is also that you do asset management to make sure that you have a good handle on when your assets need to be replaced. The whole purpose of providing gas tax funding to municipalities is to build sustainability and build capacity, the key areas that they know municipalities struggle with. So projects proposed for 23-24 to 27-28 may include projects approved in prior years that are expected to continue beyond March 31st, 2023. And due to market conditions and the general global economic situation, there are some projects that you will see that have been approved and are seeking additional funds in this budget. Also included would be projects approved for further study in prior years that have not yet been actioned, but are still proposed as a requirement on a go-forward basis. New projects proposed to council for approval to commence in any of the years 23-24 through 25-26, so years 1 through 3. And new projects proposed to council for approval for further study to commence in any of the years 23-24 through 27-28. And a note, any new projects for approval for further study must come back to council for approval to commence should the project need to proceed. Sources of funding in the capital budget include operations, reserves, external agencies, and gas tax would be included in this category, and debenture. The note on debenture, our most recent borrowing rates are from October 2022, and they range from 3.847% to 4.177%. And it is expected that these rates will be higher with the next borrowing. We try to use reserves and/or funding for capital projects. The default source of funding is borrowing, debenture. If we need to borrow, we need to come back to council. Staff cannot change any projects to the debenture source of funding without council approval, nor can staff increase debenture amounts. So here are reserve balances as at March 31st, 2022. Obligatory reserves of 4.8 million, water utility depreciation reserves of 2.5 million. We have 7.5 million in capital reserves and 21.8 million in operating reserves. So here's an example of a capital project template. New projects will start with a 23 project number. This particular project falls under Parks, Recreation, and Culture. It's a one-time project that was discussed during the business plans, that being the East Hants Aquatic Center outdoor shed. You can see budget details under annual gross expenditures, whether a project is previously approved from a prior capital budget or council motion, approval sought or approval sought for further study. And below that would be the funding details section. Each project has information at the bottom section. There's a project summary section that would provide insight as to what the project entails. Below that, there would be project objectives and deliverables. Each project includes a section which East Hants key strategy does this project align, and this ensures that the project aligns with council's strategic plan. Each project includes a section, is this project mandated by regulatory authorities? And this provides council with the information on the necessity of a specific project. And at the beginning of the capital budget document, there is a capital project summary for each year, beginning on page 5. And page 5, 6, and 7 all relate to 23-24 capital projects. So there are 21 new projects this year. Several of the new projects reoccur each year, such as business park development, streetlights, hydrants, and truck replacements based on fleet management. Project 23005, the East Hants Aquatic Center outdoor shed. This was the project just shown on the last slide, and it was discussed during the business plan presentation, and it is seeking $20,000 in 23-24. There are also two new vehicles for planning and development, one in 23-24 for building inspection, and another in 25-26 for bylaw enforcement. Both are approval sought for $40,500. We also have $800,000 approval sought in 24-25 for project 23017, Kiln Creek Central Park. And this particular project will span over 3 years. A portion of the funding comes from the developer, and the remaining will be from reserves. And on the screen, you can see a rendering of the proposed park. Other new projects include projects number 23007 and 23008, both traffic calming projects. And these have already been approved by council, but are new additions to the capital budget. There are a few projects for approval sought in 23-24 with funding from special reserves, including a new generator for the Waste Management Center, improvements for household hazardous waste storage, a storage container for large green carts, and a camera to conduct wastewater inspections within wastewater lines and lift stations. Project 23015, water main upgrade in Lance. It's approval sought for $170,000. And this project is to be done in conjunction with replacing the wastewater mains detailed in project 16009, that being the Lance wastewater collection upgrade project. And then project 23016, district metered area. It's approval sought for $316,000. This project includes 4 large district meters to assist in water leak detection. We have a few new projects for further study. There is a PRC truck replacement for $60,000 in the year 26-27.
We just have one question, I believe, coming from the last slide. Councilor Mitchell.
Could you go back to the last slide a minute? The digital speed signs, how many signs can you get for that amount of money? Any idea? The 235?
Through the chair, I might have to defer to Director Vino.
Oh my goodness. Through Chair.
I'm assuming we're buying them outright?
Pardon me?
I'm assuming we're buying them outright to own?
Yeah, correct. So that includes the purchase of the signs and the installation of them as well, because they're permanent. The breakout is over. We had a 3-year phasing in timeline, so there's a spend in year 1, 2, and 3. The number of signs in year 1, I don't recall the exact number, but I believe. Oh my goodness. I would have to refer to the past report. I could check that and get back to you before the end of the evening.
No, I'm just curious to see, these are movable ones that you can move around the municipality?
No. So, through Mr. Chair, these are for permanent placements at community entrances.
Oh, okay.
So these are they're there to be fixtures for the duration. So the strategy on the placements is at key points where the speed limit changes at entry points into different communities of interest. So entering into Lance southbound near Robert Scott Drive, for instance.
Okay.
The entrances into Shuby, Maitland.
So down the 214 by Carmy's goes from 80 to 50?
That's in the list as well. Yep. So not all will happen in year 1. There's a phased-in approach that was listed in a previous report that shows which signs, locations, and where. I can find that report and send it to all of council this evening if that was the wish of
Solar powered or?
not the some will, some won't. Depends on the setup. Ideally, yes. The cost is minimal.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and that was gone over in a previous report where we identified those areas and set it out in council. So next up, Councillor Rhino.
Yeah, so that is coming out of reserves, for those digital speed signs?
Through the chair, that is correct.
That's correct?
That's correct.
Oh, good, thank you.
Through the chair, through the warden. There was a council motion at the time that the project was brought forward, and that those 2 projects that are there on traffic calming are coming from year-end surplus this year, which will be put into reserves for next year and the 3-year program.
So it's year-end surplus.
Yes,
And anything from year-end surplus goes to reserve anyway, correct?
that's correct. I just wanted to make sure it was clear that's what the motion was, that we would be using this year's surplus to fund it.
And how do we look for that?
We are expecting a surplus this year.
How much?
A surplus, we're expecting a surplus this year, so that's what would be funding it.
And
From
what
the
are,
D-
what are we saying what are we estimating for a surplus?
It's in our projections in the business plan. That does need to be updated, but part of that is from the deed transfer tax surplus that we're running. And you'll see that in a little bit. I have slides to show that. Okay.
That all, Councillor Rhino?
Thank you.
Director of Infrastructure.
Through Mr. Chair, just to follow up on digital speed display signs, 8 locations in year 1, 7 locations in year 2, and 2 locations in year 3 was what was presented in the report. There was a tweak in order, so some might got shifted up, but that's the general split, approximately. 8 locations means one direction, so it's not necessarily both directions.
Yeah, and that was, all those locations were debated in council and when the motion was made, so they were all note there. All right, continue on.
Through the chair, we have a few new projects for further study. There is a PRC truck for $60,000 in the year 26-27. We have a building inspection vehicle for $40,500 in the year 27-28, and an industrial grinder at the Waste Management Center in 24-25 for $500,000. There are 2 new projects seeking approval for approval sought and further study. And these are two projects that we do each year. We have 23013. The hydrants project is seeking $60,000 in 23-24 and also in 24-25. And then 70,000 further study in each of the 3 years after that. In project 23014, the regular replacement of water meters is seeking 114,400 in 23-24 and 225,000 in 24-25, then 50,000 further study in each of the next 3 years after that. Okay, so this slide and the next one details any change in dollar amount for existing projects. First, a note on trucks. The cost of trucks has increased, and you will see several truck replacements increased in the budget. It includes project 18014, a PRC truck has a $10,000 increase. Project 20037, a wastewater truck is looking for a $20,000 increase. And project 20031, a water truck looking for a $25,000 increase. Then project 22010, park revitalization Shubenacadie River, is seeking $6,000. However, this particular project, the $6,000 is funded from an external grant. Parks Playgrounds project is seeking $15,000. And the tourism infrastructure project is seeking $20,000, and both of these are due to changing market conditions. We also have project 21025, sidewalk replacement of aging asphalt in Enfield. It's a $510,000 increase in the further study amount. It was $1.7 million in the prior budget, and this is now up to $2.21 million. And the organics transfer station repairs, this project is seeking $125,000 in the year 24-25, also based on our latest market estimates. Project 10022, the Shubenacadie wastewater treatment plant replacement. Council received a report from the Director of Infrastructure and Operations regarding the increase in this particular project, and that increase was $1.835 million. Project 10050, Barney Brook Lift Station Upgrade, and Project 16009, the Lance Wastewater Collection Upgrade. They are for approval sought in 23-24 in order to start these projects. There is an increase as a result of the higher construction costs.
We have a question. Councilor Rano.
The industrial grinder at the waste management, budget for sought for approval, for further study? Okay, I didn't see that there, excuse me. See. So that would just, like I say, put that off to further down the road? Or are we looking for that right away?
Through the chair, yeah, that particular project is further study, so it would have to come back to council in order to proceed.
Through Mr. Chair, it is for further study. Staff need to spend time to build a business case and rationale. The equipment pricing at the time we were looking at it was $500,000. The latest model that we were looking at this past week is now $600,000. It's not a cheap venture. That said, that type of equipment we do contract out that work. We bring in outside contractors that bring in equipment, and depending on what is required from the new C&D regulations that are being put in front of us, staff are trying to get prepared and looking at every scenario. And so we're putting this number in front of council so everyone is aware this could be a consequence or a requirement from the C&D regulations because of what we'll have to do to manage materials on site. It also could be very helpful in our response time to issues such as Hurricane Fiona, where our stockpile of wood and debris that came on the site was significant. So it's a high level to start the to flag that we're going to have a future conversation on this potentially. So it's not meant for an ultimate decision, just to flag a future conversation on the topic.
So this will come back up then for discussion and approval. All we're doing is approving it to look, for you guys to look at it? Because that's not how I understood it. I understood it as we approve it and then it doesn't have to come back to council. I'm
Nope.
pretty sure that's what I heard.
No, it's
Okay, maybe I misunderstood. So that there will be further discussion. Will we save money on this? By buying this ourselves?
through you, Mr. Chair. That is what the detail on a business case that has to be worked through, yet to be determined, and will come back for a future discussion with council. That would not proceed without a approval from
Okay.
council, not where this is just for further study.
Okay, thank you.
Next, we have Councillor Musa.
It's not about the budget, it's about those things. Do we still need them as a requirement? Because I only see two big lights and they're moving every time it moves, so I can't see anything on the board.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, the warden and I have had this conversation just in the last week about the barriers and about the hearing. So I did send you an email today looking for some feedback on on installing speakers above in the ceiling so you can hear better. We also have procured some headphones that you can plug directly into your microphone to hear better. The barrier conversation really is one that you as council have to have, because I'm not comfortable saying take them down or not. If you, the warden and I didn't know if we were ready to do that, because we still do have some COVID in the community, and some people have health issues and whatnot, so we weren't going to recommend you take them down. But that is a conversation that if you want to have, we can schedule some time at committee to have that conversation.
So if we can lower it down, probably, but I can't see anything on the board and I can't follow because he's moving all over the place, so I don't know.
So you can't see because you have to look through the glass to see it?
I have to look
glare.
through the glass and all I see is two lights moving, like those two lights, the reflection, all over the board. I don't know if you see the same thing.
Warden Rolls.
Yes, and maybe we could turn a light off, that would help with that. When the CAO and I discussed this, I do know, and I'm not going to call anyone out by name, I do know we have at least one person who has some compromised immunity issues, for lack of a better word. And I know personally myself, there are times that I would not have been here at a meeting if these were not up, because I felt like I was just getting over a cold but I felt comfortable coming because I wasn't going to infect anyone with the barriers here. So, I mean, it's certainly majority rules. I am not in favor of removing the barriers yet. There would be some expense in removing them and some repairs, and we don't know if we might be in a position they'd have to go back up at some time, so. Yeah, so.
In any event, it's a discussion for committee, not for budget. So that can be put on the committee agenda and we'll address it there.
Do you want it on the agenda? Or is that like it's...
Councillor Tingley.
Through the chair, I had a question about the grinder as well. Jesse mentioned that there was a lot of wood and that sort of thing came in after Fiona. Who would basically be using the grinder? Like, what purpose is it? Is it for insurance claims, or like is?
Through Mr. Chair, the the bulk wood is grinded up for transportation and removal. Ultimately, clean wood is grinded up and shipped to a composter, or it's land applied. It's ground up to be reused versus ending up in a C&D cell. Is the intent is to find ways to leverage it. When you grind up the wood, I'll do my pitch right off the bat. Grinding wood is a great drying agent for organic composting. So if we knew anyone that was in the business of processing organics or was to be in the future, it is a huge asset in drying agent compound. But in today's world, so construction debris, so clean wood that gets piled up in one pile, anything that has paint or is compromised or attached to other things ends up in the C&D landfill site, so it takes up space and more cost. Any clean wood, right now we have a contractor that comes in and operates their equipment. However, our staff do help and are trained in filling it in. You load this grinder with a loader. This isn't hand bombing into a grinder. This is large equipment and a lot of people separation. It's a dangerous piece of equipment, and so you have to have a lot of safety protocol in place for it too. This is large industrial sized grinding, which is needed to optimize load size, moving it off site. So if not, we would just be shipping air.
My question is, should the users of the people that are benefiting from this, like if it's not just regular residents that are dropping this off, if there's a narrow few group that is dropping this off, so should there be extra tipping fees or whatever it is? Is that a reasonable question?
Through you, Chair, to be honest, it's quite regular. A lot of the loads come from private residents. So that's what accumulates over time is absolutely residential.
All right, next up, Councillor Mitchell.
Just a quick question. With the reduced lighting, does that have any effect on the live streaming? Anybody saying anything? It does? It's good? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mitchell. Warden Rolson.
Yeah, I just wanted to remind folks before we get too hung up on the grinder, it's in the column for further study, which, as the director has said, just means it's something that's appeared on their radar that we will probably have to discuss within the next 5 years. It's not on the column to approve to be spent in any way. It's just a heads up to us that it's something that has popped up on the radar that we'll have discussion about. Thank you.
Back to you.
So, through the chair, I believe we left off at project 16009, the Lance wastewater collection upgrade. So I mentioned there is an increase to the approval sought for this for $730,000 in 23-24 as a result of the higher construction costs. However, you have been provided with a new project template today for this project, and it is just to change the source of funding in the amount of $760,000. We're changing it from sewer infrastructure reserves to gas tax. That's what that changes. In addition, there are also several lift station upgrades for approval sought or approval for further study. Project 20036, the Ross Hill lift station, has construction costs added to this budget, whereas last year's capital budget only had the design element. For project 20016, this is the other one that a new project template has also been provided to council today. And it is to change a portion of the source of funding from sewer infrastructure reserves to special reserves. Project 13005, the water tower renewal in Lance. There's an increase of $685,000 based on a recent due diligence review and the expanding scope. If you turn to page 59 of the document, you can see a full description of the new scope of this project. And finally, we have 4 water main renewals in Shubenacadie. These are for further study. These further study amounts have been increased based on current market conditions. And that concludes the capital budget presentation. We'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Council, you've seen the presentation of the capital budget and all the changes and amendments. Is there any more questions for staff? Seeing no questions, thank you so much. We'll move on to the next topic on the agenda. Which will be the deed transfer tax revenue. I guess Janice is taking this, or is Sue coming with you? Oh, Sue's coming up as well. There you go. Whenever you're ready, go ahead.
Thank you, Chair. So this particular slide and the next couple of slides are in regards to a discussion last week about the deed transfer tax and a discussion on the general tax rate. So, yeah, just over here, Jan. Yeah, there we go. Perfect. Okay. So the first slide just shows where the deed transfer tax was the last 3 years. It's important to just note, you can see in 2019, 2020, it was 1.5 million, which was just a little better than what we were used to. That was part of the growth that we were seeing, and it's pre-COVID. And then when we got to 2020, 2021, and last year, you can see the results of the impact of COVID and the sales and so on, as well as some of the growth. So that just helps to show where it was to date. And then the next slide gives you an outline of where we are today as of December 2022 versus last year at the same time. So you can see we're trending high again this year because there was still houses changing over, especially the beginning of the year, still impact from COVID and the market. And also because the interest rates earlier in the year were much less, and the interest rates have continued to climb. And last week we saw another Bank of Canada increase. So the prime rate now is 6.7, so it's quite substantial. So we're not sure how that's going to impact next year and the deed transfer and what the impacts will be. But that's where we are this year to date. And also, as I had mentioned earlier, this is where we will see a surplus this year is the impact of the substantial amount over budget. The budget this year is 1.6 million, and we're at 2.7, and we have 3 more months to go.
All right, Sue, first question up, Councillor Rhino.
Sure.
Sorry, your thing was on. Okay, continue on, Sue.
So if you want to go to the next slide, we're good. So the next slide is to get into the discussion this evening if council wants to entertain increasing the budget revenue for the deed transfer tax for next year. So what we've done is we've presented what it would look like if we increase it in roughly 50,000 or 100,000 increments, as you can see there on the screen, and what that impact would be to the general tax rate and also the level of risk that council may or may not want to take. So if you were interested, just as an example, in reducing the general tax rate by another cent, then you would have to raise your deed transfer tax revenue budget by just under 225,000. And then below that, you can see if you wanted to go higher, it's 250,000, and I'm not recommending that here today to council, but that's entirely up to what you would like to move forward with. So if you are interested in reducing the general tax rate, this is an option, but I am want to be diligent and certainly express that there is some risk to do that, because if you do not receive that level of revenue next year, there's no way to offset that. And so that could lead to a deficit next year, depending on the market. However, if you did want to proceed with that, there is $275,000 in reserve right now that we put there in case we didn't make it when we made the budget, but the budget last year, to mitigate that risk. And if you wanted to consider that for next year, you could do that. Or if you want to take some of the surplus that you're seeing in the deed transfer tax this year and put a little bit more into that reserve, if you increase this budget, that'll help to mitigate that risk as well.
All right, Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, when I first came on council, I got the idea that we do not budget for surplus, right? We're not allowed to budget for surplus.
That's correct.
But when I see like we have revenue like 2.7 million and we only put in 1.6 million, that means we are budgeting for 1.1 million surplus.
So I can respond to that through the chair. So the difficulty with this particular item, this revenue, is it is something that we can only estimate. We have no idea what the market is going to, facilitate next year. We don't know how many houses are going to change over. And the other thing too is in the last 2 years, the market cost of the houses was substantial. The amount of cost in the market when the houses were turning over was way above what normally would happen. And that's where we're seeing this large increase in the deed transfer tax. The markets are now starting to normalize. The price of the houses are coming down. So, and we're not sure how many houses are going to change over with the large increase in the interest rates. So we are basically, when we do this budget, we're taking the best possible scenario that we think, and we're being conservative. You're absolutely right, because if you don't meet that budget, then you could run a deficit next year.
I don't know if you see that. I don't see that, because I don't know if John sees that too. So we have like huge subdivision coming in, and nobody's building to rent. Like they all building to sell. So I think that trend is gonna continue for many years to come. So I don't think there's any risk there. Plus, if we think we have risk, we can add 250,000, whatever we need to do this budget, and from the surplus add for next year and the year after. From this one, we could figure out 5 years down the road. Like you have 2.7 already without the next 3 months. So that will put us 1.1 million above. So that's for 4 years at least to do what we're doing now.
The CAO is going to weigh in there for you, Councillor Musa. Go ahead, CAO.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Councillor, you're not wrong. But the risk isn't really Sue or I's to take when we put a budget in front of you. So we had the same conversation last year. Council decided to increase their budget from, I believe, 1.3 million to 1.6 million, or 1.4 million to 1.6 million. You made that decision, and now we're sitting at 2.7 million. The same arguments were true last year. We don't know. Last year, we weren't seeing the downturn in the pricing and the downturn in the interest, so the risk was lower, in my opinion. We don't know what the impact of interest rates are going to be. We know we're still going to get development. We have developers that have put plans in front of us. We understand that they're going to be building. We don't know how their plans might be affected by change of interest rates. And really, our whole budget is built around that, hope for development, and we think we'll likely get it. If you want to do that, that is entirely up to council. It's entirely up to council. I can't sit here and say that I would recommend you put your budget up to 1.9 million, but I also wouldn't tell you not to do it either. You've seen the level of risk. The risk is yours to take, and you do have money in reserve. So if you don't meet it this year, you can use that money from reserves. The problem is then you're really playing catch up next year. In order to get that 1 cent reduction this year, you're playing catch up next year to fund it and then find the money again. So it's just the risk that you take, and it's absolutely council's risk to take if you want to. That would be a decision we would wait for you folks to give us direction on.
I'm not saying it. I'm just sharing my point of view with everybody here in the room, and after that, the decision will be made. I'd like to hear from you. I'd like to hear from everybody to see if I'm right. Could be wrong, could be right. I don't know. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Musa. Next up, Councilor Tingley.
Through the chair, I agree with Eli a bit, but if I'm told by a chartered accountant that there's a high risk, I'm not going to bet my money or bet somebody else's money on it. So I just would follow staff's recommendation as to the amount of risk involved, and I just, if it's high risk, I just wouldn't want to take a chance.
Thank you, Councilor Tingley. Yeah, and with risk comes everything else, and then if you look at the current trends, it's already been a 12% reduction in the average house cost across Canada in 2020, the end of 2022, going 2023, due to the interest rates. So a few more people have to talk. Next is the warden.
Thank you. And I'm usually very risk averse, but I'm looking at the fact that we're at around 2.7 million now, and we have 3 months to go. Is that correct? So that's around $300,000 a month, correct?
It's trending down now. The houses don't turn over as much during the winter months, like January, February, March, and it picks back up again. It's usually around 100,000 the last couple of years, 100 to 150 a month, maybe. So I wouldn't go that
We're probably
high.
going to get at least another 300,000 to take us to the 3 million mark. And if we take, we're projecting, well, let me look at my numbers here. The draft budget has 1,650,000 in it now. And in order to reduce the tax rate another cent, we would have to increase our deed transfer by 225,000. Is that correct? And that would take it to 1,875,000, which, you know, this year we're going to have 3 million. At the 2.7 million, the 1,875,000 would be $825,000 less than what we've brought in this year. And if you add another 300,000 to that, like, I guess my point is at the 1,875,000, we'll still be budgeting for $1 million less than what we've brought in this year. And I know there's some risk there, but I also know we have some money in reserves to mitigate a risk. And this is an unprecedented year of increased assessments. And I just think, should we decide to do that, we have to do it with in mind that if something completely untoward happens and the market crashes completely and we don't meet that target, that next year or the year after, we will possibly be faced with increasing that 1 cent again to make up for it. We may not be able to carry it through, or we may be able to when we look at the growth and the projections. So I'm not quite as risk averse this evening as I usually am, because I do see that if we were to go down there to that 1,875, we're still projecting that we'll bring in $1 million less than we did this year. And I think that's kind of a pretty good hedge myself. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Counselor Rhino.
You know, we're talking about risk and things, then we're talking about we could bring in, if something fails, we could bring in from reserves. Again, if we keep pulling from reserves, we're gonna have left as a bank account. We gamble on this, we go. I don't know. For me, why don't we deal with what we do know? If we cut that there person at the Waste Management Center, there's 80,000. And we mentioned here tonight about
Counselor Rhino, we could talk about cuts at the end. We're talking about this topic, so.
yeah, and this is what I'm talking about. It all leads into one. Are not we having a budget discussion?
We are having a budget discussion.
Well, I don't think I'm out of order talking about everything in the budget.
I just think you should, if you're talking about the D-transfer tax right now, when we're done with the complete budget, if you want to go over your cuts at that point,
Well,
you
if
can
you
put
would
your
let
cuts
me
forward at that
finish,
point.
then I would tie it together.
But how does a cut does not relay into the discussion on D-transfer tax. If you want to talk about a proposal to amend a part of the budget, then you can propose it at that time. At this time, we're going to keep discussion on the D-transfer tax. Next, Warden.
In an effort to perhaps move a discussion along around the D-transfer tax, because we do have another slide coming up around D-transfer, to get the read of the room and know what we want to do, I'm going to put a motion on the floor to raise the proposed budget for D-transfer to the $1,875,000.
I'll second that.
On before the motion, Councillor Rhino.
Yes, I wish to be excused. I don't feel well.
All right. If I can just pass it to the warden, I had a question before the motion. With the D-transfer tax, we already have a thing with it. So in the budget, that 1.65, the first $400,000 of D-transfer tax goes to the urban service rate, correct? So it's really 1.25 million that is left over for the general rate.
I'm just looking at the CAO. It's actually this year in the proposed budget, it's 430,000. We proposed at the very first budget meeting an additional 30,900, I think, to offset we put in a 7.7% increase in the 400,000 in the proposed budget at executive committee. So it's just over 400,000.
I was ill that day and I
Yeah.
missed it
Yeah,
because
sorry about that.
if you look at the urban service rate, that services, 6 out of the 11 districts, and those 6 out of 11 districts are 55%, bring in 59% of this revenue,
Correct.
right? And right off the bat, they're getting $400,000 to start with, and then the rest of it goes and gets divvied out. You have other districts that make up a way smaller portion that all of their D-transfer tax goes to the general rate, and they are contributing a much higher percentage based on their makeup of council. So this is a question that I've raised before that I think needs to be looked at. When you say 60% of the D-transfer tax comes from the corridor, well, it's 55% of the districts. It's 6 out of 11. They should be raising at least 55% of the D-transfer tax. right? And when you look at other districts that are raising well above what their percentage is on council, it just seems like by taking that first lump sum to the urban service rate, where's the rest of that being divvied down for the other districts? That's just my question.
Through you, Madam Vice Chair, there really is no answer to that question. You don't have a tax policy that says that your D-transfer tax gets divided between districts. So if you were to take the D-transfer tax and start to divide it up, and we have done that in years past, at year end, when you know what your surplus is, and there's specific projects that, or funds that your districts required additional funds for, we have done that, but we don't currently have a tax policy that says that you shall do this. If that's something council would like to dive into in this coming year, you can, but whatever you take from this D-transfer tax policy above and beyond what you do now for the urban service rate, you would have to look at replacing somehow on your general tax rate.
And if I could be allowed to give a bit of history on how that happened. That goes back, if memory serves me correctly, to a time when the municipality was operating with 3 different tax rates. And the rural areas paid the highest rates, the suburban areas were next, and then the urban areas paid the lowest cents per dollar. That did not work well for council at all. It provided for a very fractured council and a very difficult year that I don't think anyone who was here at that time would care to repeat. So at the time, we came together as a council and we made the agreement that to get back to one single tax rate for the municipality for the general rate, that the portion of the D-transfer tax would be allocated to the urban service rate based on the fact that at the time we did it, that's where the majority still of that money was generated. So that's kind of how that came about. I just thought I'd throw that out there because I'm old. I was here when it happened.
Can I just add to the, so for councilors' benefit, from the first day that we started presenting the budget, when we looked at that $400,000 from, I think it was probably 2007 was the value. Of course, that $400,000 at the time had an incredible amount of buying power for the urban service rate on infrastructure and an impact on the rates for those folks. That $400,000 now has minimal impact on the urban service rate as far as a revenue. I mean, it's certainly beneficial to them. But the recommendation this year would be to increase that amount by CPI as you progress through as a tax policy. So you don't get into the same position that you get into if you don't increase cost by CPI. We've had that conversation a number of times around the table. So the recommendation would be to increase that portion of the D-transfer tax by CPI on a go-forward basis, so you don't get that number, it hasn't been updated in 15 years. So again, that's something else that council can look at, but I would highly recommend you keep that keeping pace with CPI.
And if I could just continue, and that's why I was bringing this up. It's been 15 years since it's been looked at, and I bet you back 15 years ago, that D-transfer tax was probably 75 to 80% coming from the corridor area. About 65. So it, to me, being fair and equitable, if all the districts are bringing in the same amount of money based upon, there's 6 districts bringing in 59%, right? So it's like, it's less than 10% per district if you break it down for the overall benefit of the 6 districts. It's less than 10%, even though some of the districts in there are bringing in substantially more, but other districts that benefit from that are bringing in less because it's looped together as one. Taking a large amount of money directly from that to benefit those 6 out of the pot that's supposed to be, that at the end goes to benefit everybody, allows a certain group to benefit twice. And I fully support trying to help out the urban service rate. I would not want to go back to a 3 tax system, But I do believe with the way revenue has changed and things have changed, we should probably take another look at this, because maybe there is a better system that's equitable that would allow more of the D-transfer tax from that area to go to the urban service rate, because that benefits them. And then the other areas will be able to get some benefit as well, because it's been a long time. It's been 14 years. A lot's changed in municipality in 14 years. And I think we should have a look at that going forward. I have no problem with this year's budget. I have no problem even increasing by CPI, because I know the cost of everything has changed, but the amount of revenue being brought in has changed as well. And there's expectations out there by all residents that things are done fair and equitable for everybody. And those who contribute should benefit. And that's just what I have on that, so.
Thank you, Madam Warden. So just some perspective on when this was put in place in 2000, I'm going to say 7 and 8, but it could be a little bit off. The D-transfer tax was 40% of the $1 million budget we had for D-transfer tax. If you look at the actuals for last year, for example, the D-transfer provided to the urban service rate was about 12% of the actual. And at one point, it was 40% of whatever we collected. So as that budget went above $1 million, it was more than the 400,000. That was then a tax policy change said, no, it's 40% of the first $1 million of D-transfer tax. And if you look at what that 400,000 is now as a percentage of your current budget, it's only about 24% of that. So it really has become a lesser amount of even your D-transfer tax budget, not mentioning your actuals. So I'm not sure when you look at the dollar values. I mean, 1.9 million from last year came from the corridor districts. About 1.4 came from the rest of the districts combined. So the difference is still that 400,000 that's being offset. So I'm not sure if that's how we got the 400,000 to start with. We can certainly go back. I mean, I have all the documentation from back in the day. We can open that conversation back up, but I guess I would need to figure out what your desired outcome is from that. Because when you start to tinker with your D-transfer tax and giving more of it to specific purposes, then you start to have to collect more on that general tax rate. So, and whether the Station Council wants to have now during these budget deliberations, or whether you want to have a conversation sort of midway through the next year in preparation for next year's budget, would be something else we would need to know.
So my intent was basically that in those 6 districts, they're getting to benefit twice, right? Where everybody else is donating 100%, they're donating minus the 400,000, which comes off the top. And if you look at per district, there are lower districts in the rurals, there's lower districts other places, but they're, like, I'm speaking for my district as well, like, you know, we're punching, if you want to go back one slide where it shows all the districts, right? I mean, there's over $600,000, right? And I have no problem with the entire amount of $600,000 going to help the general tax rate and help all residents. The thing is, the urban service rate is getting double helped. They're getting all of the benefit from the general funds, and they're getting a cut off the top. Now, that might still work. It might be a good formula, but I just think this is something that needs to be looked at, because it's been 14 years. And
So you're saying before next year's budget?
Before next year's budget, not
budget.
this year's budget. I think it needs to be brought back as a topic of discussion going into next year's budget, because I'm sorry, Mount Uniacke at 25% and 26%, it's 2 districts. We're not 20% of council, so we're less than 20% of council. So we're actually contributing more than what the corridor is. So that's where I don't see it, because you have 6 districts contributing 59. and you have 2 contributing 25, right? So that's less than 10%. That's almost 10% a district in the corridor, and it's 12.5% each district in Mount Uniacke. So things like that, for fair and equitable, should be looked at. And who knows, maybe nothing will change, but I do think it needs to take a look at going forward, especially as everything grows, figuring out the next formula, because our infrastructure requirements are going to go up as well. There's going to be a lot more infrastructure requirements as we build in the serviced area. So, just having it keep increase every year, there might be a better formula to make it equitable that helps the urban service rate and helps all residents in some way contribute equally. Thank you.
Thank you. I would remind councilors that we do have a motion on the floor. I will turn the chair back over to you, Deputy Warden.
Thank you, Warden. And next on the list is Councilor Mitchell.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Following the discussion, my question is, speaking to the motion, and my question is to staff. You've heard the motion. Is it doable, and is there any downside?
Through the chair. So as we mentioned earlier, there is $275,000 in reserve right now, set aside in case the target's not met to mitigate a deficit. And as the warden mentioned, there is a substantial amount this year. If you could also consider topping up that reserve if you wanted to. I couldn't sit here today and say what I think next year is going to look like. I can just be conservative as an accountant and say, I think the 1.875 is doable with the reserve there to offset if you don't meet that target. I do appreciate that, yes, we are trending still high, but I expect just from the economy and the interest rates that is going to reduce for sure next year. I couldn't say how much. And the other thing that might impact it as, of course, the housing costs are going down, which impacts it. But you may see developers move to more rental facilities instead of single dwelling units. And if that were the case, like apartment buildings, and they're rented, you wouldn't see deed transfer tax necessarily on those. You'd still see the assessment growth, but not necessarily the deed transfer tax. So just something to mention.
So it'd still be in the high category, their recommendation?
There is risk, but there is reserves there to mitigate the risk. I don't want to say, as the CAO said, I don't want to say that you should or shouldn't, but I can say that there's ways to mitigate the risk if you want to reduce the tax rate by a cent by increasing the deed transfer tax. And then you can look at it again in the next 2 years to see where you're trending. Because as the CAO mentioned, if you trend low next year and the following year, then you'll have to make up that cent on the GTR.
How long would the reserves last if the trend goes down?
So with the $275,000 that's in reserves right now, we were proposing originally $1,650,000. That is conservative. I do appreciate that is conservative. So if you add $275,000 to that gets you kind of where. That's why I just want to make sure that it's transparent and everybody understands what it means if you do make that decision.
Okay.
Yeah.
So if you take it out, smart it would be to put it back if you could.
Correct. It's just if next year it trends lower and you have to dip into the reserve, if that happened, which I can't say if it will or won't.
So you couldn't put any back?
No, there wouldn't be any there. Yeah.
Okay, that clarifies my thinking over here. Thank you.
CAO.
Through you, Mr. Chairperson. So everything Sue said is absolutely right. We can't guarantee anything, but if you end up using that money that you have in reserve in 2023, 2024 because you don't meet your budget, then you're going to have another decision to make. Do you either budget the same and hope you're going to meet it again, or do you what you can do at that point is sort of phase that budget down by using your other reserves. And so you don't have to like fix it in a year. You could fix it as your growth happens. You can bring in some money from reserves and move it around. You have enough budget in your contingency reserves that you could tweak that over 2 or 3 years to get back to good without breaking the bank per se, without changing your tax rates too much. So it would just mean that you'd have to manage that for the next 2 or 3 years, but it's certainly doable.
Thank you, CAO. Next up, Councillor Musa.
After the motion, it's okay. I'll talk after the motion.
Councillor Tingley to the motion.
Yeah, a question again through the chair to staff. So the way I'm understanding it, we can take money out of the reserves type of thing, but we could end up flip-flopping if the market continues down, and within a couple of years, we're depleting our reserves and we're increasing the rates again.
Through the chair. So there's multiple facets to this. We are in growth in East Hants, so we are expecting more assessment growth in the next few years that can offset the transfer tax if the budget isn't met, or if it doesn't continue to be what you're seeing today at 2.7 million, right? I'm not expecting it to be that high next year, but I couldn't say how high in the next couple of years. And I could be totally wrong, right? We could see a change in the interest rates. We could see the housing. We know the housing market right now is in a shortage, so there's likely people out there that are still looking for homes and looking to relocate here. But the economy is beginning to change for sure, and the interest rates are high, and I'm already seeing from my position that taxpayers are property owners are renewing their mortgages, and the interest rates are really negatively impacting that. And you'll probably see houses go on the market that are already built because of that, because people will struggle, with the interest rate and the mortgage, right? And we certainly took that into consideration all through the budget process, because we understand, and council has mentioned many times, we're trying to mitigate, and reduce the burden on the taxpayer at the same time, right? But also pointing out any risks in the budget that council would have to make if they want to reduce the burden more by doing something like this.
Okay, so just the last question. So the risk, is it really just reducing the rate now by 1 cent and then possibly having to increase it by 1 cent? Is that really?
I think CAO wants, did you want to?
Through Mr. Chairman, it's not you reduce it by 1 cent and then you increase it by 1 cent, because there's lots of things that could happen between now and then, including that increase in assessment. So, you're looking over the next few years at a lot of uncertainty as to how much assessment growth you're going to have. If you found yourself in a position where you didn't meet the 1.875 million this coming year, the province says you can't run a deficit. So you've got reserves to cover that, specifically set aside for that purpose. So that would be fine, because I would say you're definitely going to get the 1.6 million, if I had to guess. So you're only talking about a couple of $100,000 in the difference. If you don't meet it, then you have to decide, do we budget that again? And if that's the case, then the general tax rate isn't affected at all, because the budget to budget is the same. If you decide that you want to reduce it to 1.6 million, and you don't have enough growth in your assessment to cover that difference in your budget to budget, then you'd have to increase the tax rate again. But in that same budget period, you're going to have an extra 600,000 in education. You're going to have an extra 500,000 in RCMP costs. You're going to have, so there's all kind. It's not a simple formula. Having that money in reserves right now, specifically set aside last year to cover a deficit in detransfer tax, is your comfort zone for next year. So you don't have to. But having said that, you also have contingency reserves. So if you do run a deficit, council can decide to take from those contingency reserves to balance your year end. We've only had 1 year, which was 2009, where we had a serious potential to run a deficit. So, we throughout the year tightened our belts and cut a lot of the projects and eventually came in with a surplus that year. So we do those things as well as we go through the year and manage those ups and downs. And if we saw detransfer tax trending way down, that you're not going to meet that budget, we'd be here to talk to you about that long before you're in budget meetings trying to decide how to fund it. So, is that fair, Sue?
Nothing else. I think I'm kind of.
Next up is the warden.
Yes, and I understand that there's risk, and I would expect our finance people to say exactly what they're saying. But I go back to the fact that if we increase that to 1,875, we're still well over $1 million less than what we've brought in this year. So even allowing that we're going to bring in next year than this, we're allowing that it's going to be $1 million less. And if the new development that comes next year doesn't increase the detransfer tax, it's still going to increase the assessment roll. And we're still going to get the assessment growth on that. So that's why, and add to that we purposefully took some of our surplus last year and put it into reserves to cover any deficit we might have if we were wrong on the deed transfer. And at some point in time, I guess I just think if you've put money into a reserve to cover it, you got to use it once in a while. And this is the year of unprecedented assessment increase for many, many people. And if this is the year to take the risk, knowing that we have the money in the bank to cover it next year, to perhaps mitigate a little bit of that increase, then I guess maybe next year I'll be back to myself and sitting here saying, too risky. But for this year, looking at the numbers we've had and looking, and absolutely right, there may be homes go on the market because interest rates have gone up. But I suspect there'll still be people to buy those homes, and we'll still be collecting deed transfer tax off them, perhaps maybe not off of 750,000, maybe off of 700,000 or 650, but we're still going to collect deed transfer tax as those homes sell. And I'll still point out that the market value of houses here is still substantially less than what it is in Toronto or Vancouver or many places that people seem to be moving here from. So I recognize and completely agree that there's a certain amount of risk there. Our risk is mitigated, and this is perhaps the 1 year out of many that I would say I support taking the risk this year. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Two left to speak towards the motion that's on the floor to increase it to this amount. Next up, Councillor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this year, I have a question about the assessment. Like, is there any way that next year, let's say the province if the inflation go down and CPI went down, they lower the assessment again and the cap too? So there's risk everywhere. But if we increase, if that happen, and we have to increase the rate, but the burden will stay the same, that it will equal each other, right? And I have something to say about the previous topic, but I'll leave it till after. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. Next up, Counselor McPhee, to the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd just like to say that after listening to the discussion, I will be supporting the motion. I think occasionally you do have to take a risk. Probably this is a good time. I don't see the markets completely collapsing. If we go into a nationwide depression, well, then we got a lot of problems. This 1 cent's not going to make that big a difference. So that's all I have to say.
Thank you, Counselor. Seeing no more conversation on the topic, I'll be looking for the question. Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. And the motion has passed unanimously. Next up, commercial tax rate. Oh, Counselor Musa.
Yeah, about the deed transfer tax. So that 400,000, when I first came on council, we had discussion about it, and they said, we put it for the people who brought all the infrastructure and like, they started everything in here, and I agree 100% with it. But increasing it is good. But I mentioned it back then, and I'll mention it here. We have 5,000 more units coming in. So when we're gonna stop, like, because used to be probably 7 cents on each house, it's gonna be 3 cents. So we gotta deal with that. I don't like, if not, if we're gonna distribute it like proportionally, like to keep the burden off the people, it's gonna increase substantially. Am I right or no? Okay, so
I believe
so you had 9,000 units, or how many units that 400,000 it's split, it's helping? Like, let's say 5,000. 5,000 homes? Okay, so in a couple of years it might be what? 3,000? So we have 6,000 coming. So that burden is gonna be more and more on the people, and at one point they have to deal with it, right? Or we're gonna keep increasing it to the 400,000, we're gonna keep increasing it, or it's gonna stop somehow? I don't know if you get my point. With the new units coming, like 5,000 units, so those 3,000 are not gonna get the same amount they used to get every year. It's gonna be lower and lower and lower every year. So that's one point. I don't know if you can answer, if you have an answer for it or not.
Okay, go ahead, CAO. But we, on this topic, remember, we've already requested for committee to come back and talk about this again at committee. So go ahead, CAO.
Well, you talked for 2 hours about it.
So, I'm not sure if I don't know if you're arguing for or against something. The impact that $400,000 is having on the folks who are paying for all the infrastructure that's driving the growth of the municipality in assessment primarily, that was the reason why that 400,000 was shared. Back then, that was a significant amount of that budget. It was quite impactful. Over the years, because we haven't increased it, it's become way less impactful on the people who are paying the bills to, your whole capital budget almost is millions of dollars that the folks in the urban service area are paying for. That's what's driving your growth in assessment primarily in the commercial and the corridor. There is some, the Mount Uniacke area is certainly seeing growth as well. That's being funded primarily by the general tax rate in the business parks is where you're seeing your commercial growth in your business parks. So the sort of what I would refer to as buying power of that $400,000 is significantly decreased over the last 15 years. And in the next few years, as we add to, say we add another 3,000 homes to the corridor area, each one of those folks is going to be getting less and less benefit from that 400,000.
That's my point, yeah.
Right. So that is all true. They will be getting less benefit and yet paying more for the services that they are paying for those to drive that growth. So I think if anything, the argument is there to look at that $400,000 and put some kind of formula around it that provides more impactful difference to the folks who are paying the urban service rate. I'm not sure if that's where council's thinking of I guess Councillor Perry says, we've already asked for it to come back to committee. Right now, I don't have a mandate from this group to bring it back to committee and talk about it, and I don't exactly know what your objectives would be for that. So is it just bring it back with a history and see where we are, or do you want me to bring it back with a recommendation to meet certain objectives? And if so, what are those objectives need to be? And maybe we need a whole discussion at committee to say what does the report want to say? What objectives do you want to meet from that report? And then we can go away and do the report. So if this committee wants us to bring a discussion to committee, we can take a motion from this group and take it to executive committee. But I'm not sure that I would do that without some kind of formal recommendation from budget committee to have that discussion.
Yeah, and I also want to have, like, if the discussion, somebody put motion, I would like to look at the Mount Uniac area too, because 10 years ago, probably the corridor was supporting the Mount Uniac area and the rural area. But at this point, I think if we're not neck to neck, I think Mount Uniac percentage per household is bringing more than any other district here. So I think we should be looking at the impact on those people that the average home in Mount Uniac went like $40,000 above last year. That's just in 1 year. And if you split the whole corridor by 6 and the Mount Uniac by 2, I think we're higher than the whole thing. So I think if we want to look at people who pay the area rate and the impact of the taxes on them, I think we should be looking at the people that bring in higher and higher assessment to this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Musa. Warden Rolson.
Thank you. And yes, I'd agree. There's certainly been a shift because the Mount Uniac area growth is such that it has caught up and sometimes surpassed, the high district of the highest growth, I believe, as the deputy warden told me, is one of the Mount Uniac districts. So certainly there are changes. We went to the $400,000 to the deed transfer tax, and I'll be blunt, because that was the only way those of us here at that time could get back to one tax rate. That's what we had to give to get back to one tax rate. And that's why we did it, because we wanted to go back to one tax rate, because 3 separate ones did not work. I am perfectly open to having a discussion, but I agree with the CAO. I think the discussion has to be around what we want to accomplish with the deed transfer tax. And maybe at some point there'll be a report that says, all right, if we didn't put any deed transfer to the urban service rate and we put it all to the general tax rate, what would be the net difference for those houses that lost it? Because how much difference would that make, given that it's such a small percentage now? Because they would be saving the extra on the general tax rate as well, probably not as much as on the urban service. But those are things that I do think we would have to have some kind of a workshop or whatever to go over and see just what our thoughts are on the deed transfer tax. And to that point, I will make a motion that at a time that staff has opportunity prior to the next budget, that we start some discussions around how the deed transfer tax is allocated. And I'm not going to be more specific than that because I think we do need to have discussion and figure out what kind of reports we want them to bring, what we want to look at. And I think that's where we start. So that's my motion. Thank you.
seconded by Counselor Musa. Counselor Musa, you were on before the motion.
Yeah, in support of the motion, that could, if the retransfer tax trend continued with next year, that could benefit everybody. Because I know now there's 3 districts that doesn't benefit and they bring the higher assessment, like Grand Lake. They are the highest in all the municipality, like in assessment. And there's Almsdale, there's the 2 in Uniac, and only Almsdale probably benefit from that. But if we go like, let's say through a formula, like 600 go there and 300 distributed between the others, that could work and that could benefit everybody. I'm not trying to cut down anybody at all, like by talking. So we could go higher. Maybe it will work, maybe it doesn't, but it should be a discussion about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Musa. Question on the motion. Question has been called on the motion. We'll go to the vote. That's it. The votes are in. It's passed unanimously. Okay, now we'll continue on to the corporate or commercial tax rate. Go ahead, Sue.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm just going to refresh everyone's memory on what we brought forward last week in regards to some of the adjustments. So they're there. We talked about them and how it would contribute and that we would be able to propose decreasing the commercial tax rate by 3 cents, which you see there. And we do have a couple more adjustments that we want to talk about before we go right into the commercial discussion. And it has come to light after the draft budget was prepared that we are looking to add the bylaw enforcement officer position full-time. We just received a retirement notice from the current bylaw enforcement officer who is part-time right now, and we are looking to add that. So you'll see there the difference between the casual and the full-time. We would need an additional $50,967. And I will note that this includes all of the benefits that come with the position, not just the salary. And since I mentioned earlier, the Bank of Canada increased the interest rates again since we prepared the draft budget and we were doing our analysis. So we are comfortable in proposing that we increase our return on investments in the operations by $30,000 in income. We earn prime less 1.6%, so we are now earning 5.1% on our bank balances in the general operating. So we're quite comfortable to propose that here tonight. And with the increase, Council's budget for tax interest on outstanding tax accounts is also tied to the prime rate, which is currently 6.7. It's prime plus 700 percentile, which would, if the interest rate stays the same, which we're anticipating it will at least stay the same, possibly another increase, but I'm not hearing that right now. That means that April 1st, as per Council's current budget, we would increase the interest rate on outstanding property taxes to 14% from 10%. So that would generate an additional $21,000 approximately based on our trends for the last 3 or 4 years. So bringing that additional revenue in will offset the bylaw enforcement costs that we're looking to add to the budget. So you can see there that there's a savings of $33 with that proposal. So it will not impact the general tax rate. So we're still proposing, with all of this, a 3 cent decrease in the commercial, 3 cent decrease in the general tax rate, plus an additional 1 cent from tonight's discussion on the detransfer tax increase in revenue, which you would see when we bring back everything with the final document. So if we go to the next slide, this is actually a discussion about the commercial rates. And counselors had requested that we bring back some information on what the commercial tax rates are in the surrounding areas, the municipalities that are in close proximity, and how we compare to those. So I know that the slide is quite small, and these are average, and they're also, I just want to point out that I'm not sure that our rates are perfectly aligned to the other municipalities because they may offer different things than we offer because these are all-in rates. So I just want to point that out. But you can see that we're comparable to other municipalities adjacent to us. The town of Truro has an all-in rate of $4.50. We're an average of $3.54, and I will go into that. On service, it's $2.82. That includes fire rates on average. So, and HRM, of course, is slightly lower. They have a huge commercial tax base, so they're at $3.02. So that just gives counselors an understanding of where we are positioned based on rates in close proximity. And then in the slide, it also shows where our rates were back in 2015. We were all in at $3.72, and right now we're at $3.43. The general the general commercial rate is currently at $2.60. We were proposing $2.57, the reduction of 3 cents. It's not huge value, dollar value, which we talked about last week. It's only around $50,000, but I do think that this will make a huge difference for the commercial business owners to assist them in, like we talked about, they're seeing substantial costs, just as we are, as our residential property owners. And they're also going to be impacted by the minimum wage increases next year, as are we. I'm not sure if I mentioned, in Stewiacke is at $3.45. I did do some investigation there, and really to talk about Stewiacke tonight, I would need a lot more work because they have a different program in place right now. So that's something that if council wanted to talk about Stewiacke and what they're doing, we could bring back some additional information because they're close in proximity. Because you are seeing commercial activity there, but that is because they're offering a reduction, a phased-in approach for property taxes.
Thank you, Sue. First up to speak is the warden.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I've come around to support the 3-cent decrease on the commercial rate. Our businesses are important to the municipality, and we do want to grow our commercial base. We want to attract businesses. And as trying as these times are for residents, they are also impacting businesses. And I think that having seen that we can reduce that rate for them by 3 cents, and still reduce our tax rate by 4 cents, that's a good news story. And that sends a message to the business community that, you know, you're part of the municipality too, and we understand your challenges too, and we're still competitive. And so to me, it's a win-win. Those are my comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Warden. Next up, Councilor Musa.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know if the other councilor are interfering with resident about the tax rate, but I've heard a lot about, oh, my assessment went up 7.7%, and the rate supposed to go down 7.7%. And I have to explain to them that it doesn't have to go that because the education went up 12% and the policing went up. But to show them that it went down 4%, I think that's a good argument for any counselor who want to convince that we work for them. And same with the commercial businesses. I've heard a lot from them too, and I think it's a good gesture for us to drop it down, even probably 3 cents, but 3 cents is 3 cents. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Musa.
The next slide. Make-
Go ahead, CAO.
So counselors, just we're trying to get the next slide on the screen. Finance staff did do some work on just that, like the increases and where they're coming from. Last week, we were talking about the increases and, you know, was it just for growth or whatnot? So you'll see here the growth is kind of split between new commercial assessment and growth on those existing businesses that you have. So to Councillor Moose's point, by reducing that tax rate, you are going to help them with that offset tax burden that some of those existing businesses will see from that growth. Sorry, Sue, I kind of stole your thunder, but.
Thank you, CAO. Councilor Musa.
Just one more thing to share with council too. I was doing my research about the businesses in Mount Uniac, and I found out that one business that assessed for 700 was sold for 3.5 million. So that's going to be huge for us. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Musa. So we have a presentation. Is there anybody looking to make a motion? Warden Rolston.
Well, I'm just wondering, we've completed the review of the business plan and the capital budget. We have the adjustments in front of us. I'm just wondering, from prior year's history, are we at a point of setting the rate? Is there anything else that staff would feel would need to be presented before we set the rate? Any new information?
Go ahead, Sue.
Through the chair, the only thing that is to come back is the water utility budget, and that can be done at executive, and it's separate from the tax rates.
It doesn't
It doesn't impact.
this. Do we have a motion prepared?
Just gonna go to this. I'm gonna go to the CAO here, Warden.
Is it the slide, has it been updated? Oh yeah, here it is.
Oops.
We do have a slide for the capital budget motion. It's around slide 102-ish, 4-ish, yeah. So we have that. And we can bring up the adjustment that we just had on the screen and add to it, which you've already proposed here tonight, the 1 cent decrease over and above that from the deed transfer tax.
Well, I see, if there's no more information to come forward, and if there aren't a lot of, you know, questions left that we have,
Through you, Madam Warden, or Mr. Chairman, I may ask if we want to open the floor for any questions around the human resource report, because we did say we would answer any questions around that report.
Oops, sorry.
So the next steps, the motion for the capital budget is on the screen. And then the motion for the tax rates can be prepared to be made at council, but it would essentially be, if you'll just bear with me here for a second, it would be, oh, my kids love it when I do that to them. You have it? It would be,
We actually have the tax
Okay. So do we want to go, this would be the capital, sorry. Okay.
There's an outstanding question. Counselor Musa, you have the floor.
Do we need the motion for that 3 cents for the commercial? Okay, and one more thing, we still haven't met with the fire department, and I think we cannot make because they're getting $100,000 more than last year, this year, so I would like to have time to meet with them to talk if they need it or not. Because we might have to reduce it a little bit if they don't need it. Thank you.
Through you, so the motion would go to council in February, so if you, in February? Yeah. If you wanted to meet with your departments before then, but if you haven't met with them before then, you can defer setting that rate until a later a budget meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Musa. Warden Rolson.
Counselors, do you want me to read the motion in its entirety, or should it be read into the record as such, or? Well, I move to recommend to council that the 5-year capital budget for the fiscal years 2023, 2024 to 2027, 2028 as presented be approved and adopted effective April 21st, 2023. Administration is given approval to proceed with the previously approved capital projects and those in the approval sought section, subject to any conditions limiting such projects in previous motions of council or in policies of council. Should time permit, staff are authorized to embark on projects in this capital budget that require long-term pre-planning prior to April 1st, 2023. Projects approved for further study are approved in principle only. Amounts identified as approved for further study cannot be expended prior to presentation of a full report to council for consideration or approval through a future capital budget process. Where time permits, staff are given approval to proceed with approval sought projects from 2023-2024 prior to April 1st, 2023, and that any projects approved in the 2022-2023 capital budget not reflected as carried forward to the 2023-2024 capital budget, but that are substantially committed as March 31st, 2023, shall be carried forward to 2023-2024 based on the remaining budget at March 31st, 2023. And that this 5-year estimate of capital spending from a capital investment plan CIP is required by the federal and provincial government's funding agreements, and that the water utility sections of this budget are permitted to stand alone as the East Hants Water Utility Capital Budget is required by the Nova Scotia Utility and Review Board, and that staff be given authority to alter the sources of funding where necessary, but in no case shall the amounts to be debentured increase without prior approval of council, and that council seek ministerial approval for a temporary borrowing resolution, TBR, for any amounts in this capital budget under the debenture debt category of funding, and that pre-approval to borrow amounts in this capital budget under the debenture debt category of funding for a term not to exceed 25 years at a rate not to exceed 6.5%.
Moved by the warden, seconded by Counselor Tingley. Is there any discussion? Question's been called on the motion. We'll go to the vote. And the votes are in, and it's passed unanimously. All right, council, that brings us to the end of the agenda for today. There's one more? Go ahead, Sue.
So you'll see there the adjustments that we talked about tonight. So that is included in the motion. And if Janice scrolls down, all of your rates are here. New tax rates with everything that we've talked about tonight, with the 4-cent reduction in the GTR, 3-cent in the commercial rate. Enfield fire adjustment increased by 2 cents. And again, if there's any changes, this will come through council and they can be amended in February.
Warden Rolston.
I would move the rates as shown on the screen.
Moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Question's been called. We'll go to the vote. And it's passed unanimously. Good job. So as a result of this, there will be no budget meeting on Thursday. Great job. I'd like just to pass my congratulations on to my colleagues and to staff through the budget process for bringing this forward and working through it. And I hope that the residents can appreciate the hard work that went into it by everybody. And I think a reduction for both the commercial and the residential tax rate is great news. So seeing nothing else, I'll be looking for the motion to adjourn. Moved and seconded. All those in favor? Aye. We are adjourned.